This is the conclusion video to the Part D, Baptism is a more important sacrament than the Eucharist. So if you haven't seen the first part, please go back and watch that to find out what the arguments are so far in the question. So we are now going to conclude. In conclusion, I believe. Remember, you only put I into the conclusion. That goes in no other point in the essay. I believe that the most important sacrament is. Now, I could argue that Eucharist or baptism is important. I have used, looking at both paragraphs, the same amount of arguments. I've not put more emphasis on one than the other. So at this point, I could say that baptism is the most important one, or I could say that the Eucharist is the most important one. I am going to argue that the Eucharist is the most important one, purely because it's the last one that I wrote, no other particular reason, because you could argue it from either way, and so long as you have an argument for that, that is fine. Now remember, conclusion, and I strengths and weaknesses. So if I'm saying that the Eucharist wins, I need why that's strong, and I need why the baptism isn't as strong. So in conclusion, I believe that the most holy sacrament is the Eucharist. This is because Jesus commands everyone at the Last Supper to do this in memory of me. These are the words spoken in Mass during the liturgy of the Eucharist. And remind everyone present that Jesus himself told his disciples to reenact the Last Supper. Now, I do already have mentioned that the priest is reenacting the Last Supper and that they are repeating Jesus' words. However, I'm not repeating myself here because I'm adding things in. So I've put the actual words that were said. I have put that the liturgy of the Eucharist is the moment where it happens. I've not used that phrase before. And I'm saying that he tells the disciples to go and reenact the Last Supper. This means by Catholics celebrating Mass, they are fulfilling the commandments of Jesus himself, to remember him and his sacrifice in the actions of the Eucharist. Catholics should also go to Mass at least once a week on a Sunday, and on days of holy obligation. Such as All Souls Day. This shows just how important the Eucharist is, as it should be partaken at least weekly for the ordinary Catholic. Priests must celebrate the Eucharist every day except Easter Saturday, showing the importance of Jesus' words upon the Catholic Church. Now, I do still need to mention baptism. Baptism is still important. As Jesus himself was baptized. But when he came up from the river Jordan, whilst God said he was pleased with Jesus, he never said that everyone had to do the same and be baptized. Now, if you have argued the other way and that baptism is more important, that is also fine. You could use the argument that Jesus was baptized as the reason why baptism is more important, the fact that he did that before the whole Last Supper, that you can't be saved without the baptism, that within the church situation there is baptism before Eucharist, such as what Jesus did. So baptism has to come first. And actually, is it more important that baptism, does it show baptism is more important because it only happens once and you cannot be baptized again because you are brought into the church once and only once? Does that show it's more important? Whereas the Eucharist is done every day except for Easter Saturday. So you can genuinely argue the opposite way around. That is absolutely fine, so long as you have a conclusion with strengths and weaknesses, with a clear, this is the winning argument, because you start with an in conclusion. I believe if you start with those 4 words, we know it's your conclusion paragraph, so it's judgment, and we know it's your belief which is going to get you the marks. If you really wanted to, you could split this up into 2 parts and put why the baptism is weak or the Eucharist is strong, or the baptism is strong and the Eucharist is weak at the end of each of those paragraphs, or leave it to one final paragraph at the end. But if you look, this paragraph here is as long, if not longer, than each individual paragraph here. You are looking for at least equal paragraphs to make sure you have enough information. And don't repeat anything here, otherwise you're not gaining extra marks. I hope you found that helpful.